we'll give them a couple minutes to get into the chat here. So feel free to chat or whatever, but we're recording now. So just be aware of that too, I guess. Very cool. So what were you guys doing in Berlin together? Like what was the
Matthew was working.
Yeah.
And I was on research leave from Oberlin working. I was also working on a book, but I had no particular reason to be in Berlin. I was in France, which is where my work actually was. And then I thought, I'd never been to Berlin before. I have many, many former students in Berlin. I'd always heard about what a wonderful city it is. And I thought, well, I'm working here. I'm writing, so I can easily work there as here. And so I just made a plan to go for a month.
Landed in time to help me move into our new place.
Lift boxes. Into new place, like hung out with Hamza a bunch while Julia was having some morning sickness or what have you. I don't remember what it was specifically. But she needed a little time, and it was just great. And then we were hanging out like as much as we could. I was stealing Matthew away from domestic life every chance I got. You know, it'd be like
so great
10 at night, and I would text and be like, do you want to get a drink or something? Yeah. And so we didn't live in the same neighborhood, but we did not live on opposite sides of the city. We lived like, you were in New Cologne, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like I was in Kreuzberg in the canal area. So kind of like have rendezvous and such in the middle.
Rendezvous on the canal, and then find a place for drinks. We found this really kind of strange but great for if you wanted to work on poems bar that was like, my memory of it was like on the menu there were like nachos and stuff.
You know what? You might be, if we're thinking about the same place, I think it was actually like an Indian restaurant / bar where you could get like samosas and stuff.
Hey, that's what I'm thinking of. Samosas.
If we're thinking the same place, we're thinking about the place like that's at the canal.
Yeah,
that place. Because there was another place, like a pretty divey bar that we went to a few times too.
That's true. Yeah.
Not really conducive for working on poems.
You could smoke inside.
That's the place. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fun city. I would go back. I mean, I really would.
It's a great town.
It's pretty cool. It's timeless in a way because it's not modern either. It's not modern the way that New York is. And with, it's modern. I mean, it's like, it's a modern city, but it's not like, it doesn't have that kind of like, it hasn't been afflicted in the same way. I don't know. I find it really special.
Very cool. Well, I think we'll have probably some more folks joining us soon. But as they slowly enter into our Zoom world, I want to welcome everybody who has shown up already. And the last 8 weeks or so we've been doing this, I've actually, I've been just jumping into the reading and jumping into the conversation because we get so filled and overwhelmed with our talks that we actually end up going over. But I should probably be thanking some people along the way, as in our Des Moines Area Community College. This is our 18th, 19th year of the Celebration of Literary Arts. And there's a lot of people who helped put it together, including the Department of Liberal Arts. And the head of the department, our Dean, Jim Stick, provides most of the support and has for almost 2 decades now. So we wouldn't be anywhere without his generosity. But there's a lot of other people, our marketing, our web gurus, and folks who are able to put stuff online for us. So just want to thank everybody who has been a part of this. And we only have a couple more weeks left, oddly enough. So, and I also want to think about the loyal band of followers who have shown up every week. We usually have a pretty good attendance, but we always have about the same 20, 30, 40 people who return to us and who are obviously committed to the writing world, which I really appreciate you showing up and participating. And participation is part of what we're doing today. So I will be giving some intros here in a minute and introducing our 2 visiting writers. But first, I want to mention once again that you should get involved in the reading. And that means that we have a chat here that makes it a little bit more human instead of us just looking at boxes. And so feel free to join in and offer some insight or questions or thoughts as the readers are reading from their work. I would also encourage you to enter into the Q&A Dropbox. Put a question in there anytime throughout the reading. The more questions we have, the more you get involved and the more you get to be kind of decide what you want from this experience. So please put something into the Q&A Dropbox and we'll reserve the last 10 or 15 minutes for audience Q&A. Awesome. And you can ask anything you would like. I would like to start off with bios just to get a sense of who our visiting writers are today. And today we have Matthew Dickman, who was raised by his mother in the Lawrence neighborhood of Southeast Portland, along with his sister Elizabeth and twin brother, the poet Matthew Dickman. After studying at Portland Community College and University of Oregon.
The other Dickman.
What's that? The other Dickman.
The twin is Michael. You're dealing with Matthew today.
I am.
Yeah.
After studying at the Portland Community College and University of Oregon, he earned an MFA from the University of Texas at Austin's Michener Center. He was the recipient of a 2009 Oregon Book Award and a 2015 Guggenheim Fellow. Dickman is the author of 3 full-length collections, including All-American Poem, which won the 2008 American Poetry Review First Book Prize in Poetry, Mayakovsky's Revolver, and his most recent collection, Wonderland. And he's also a co-author with his twin, Michael Dickman, of 50 American Plays and Brother. He's the author of 4 chapbooks, 24 Hours, Wish You Were Here, Amigos, and Something About a Black Scarf. Currently, he teaches in the Vermont College of Fine Arts Low Residency MFA program, and he writes advertisements for a living, but he currently lives in Portland. Joining him is Kazim Ali. He was born in the United Kingdom and has lived transnationally in the United States, Canada, India, France, and the Middle East. His books encompass multiple genres, including volumes of poetry such as The Far Mosque, winner of the Alice James Books New England, New York Award, and the cross-genre texts entitled Bright Felon and Wind Instrument. His novels include The Secret Room, a string quartet, and among his books of essays are the hybrid memoir Silver Road and Fasting for Ramadan. He's also an accomplished translator and editor of several anthologies and books of criticism. After a career in public policy, he taught at various colleges and universities, including Oberlin College, Davidson College, St. Mary's College of California, and Naropa University. He is currently a professor of literature at the University of California, San Diego, and his newest books are a volume of 3 long poems entitled The Voice of Sheila Chandra and a memoir of his Canadian childhood entitled Northern Light. And I just want to thank both of you guys for joining us today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So great to be here.
Absolutely. I was just telling all the folks that they should participate, put something in the Q&A. You can ask anything about writing or the writing life. And I guess that's kind of where I wanted to start, maybe just very briefly, thinking about how you entered into the world of writing. We have a lot of students in the crowd and a lot of, people who have a dream of being a poet, but they're always curious about how you make that transition into that writing life. And I was curious about how you began or influences that, kind of inspired you to move into that world. Kazim, would you like to start us off maybe about how you kind of started into the world of poetry?
That is a really, really large question. I think poetry was always a part of my life growing up. I grew up Muslim. My family is observant. And so those recitations were just a huge part of our daily life, the prayers and songs and etc. So I always had poetry in my life, although it was poetry in languages I didn't understand. So it was poetry of music and sound and Arabic, Urdu too, to a much lesser extent, but Arabic has many consonants and vowels that don't exist in English. And you can't really make them with your throat unless it's almost like you have to work out the muscles to be able to do those things. And so from the youngest age, I had this sort of like Panopolis range of what sound could be and what rhythm could be. and what recitation could be. The way the poems are recited is different. And so I came to poetry like as an art form of music and sound before I came to it as writing, so, to make sense out of something. So I think that's impacted the kind of poetry that I write to this day, of course. And I don't know when I thought I would become, quote unquote, become a poet. I think that took a lot awful longer of a time, including who responded to my work. So I would write stories and write essays and write poems, and it seemed like the poems were what people really liked more. So I just kind of followed that track. But I still to this day write in all various genres. I don't make those distinctions for myself, and I don't sit down to write one thing or another. I enter the writing and then something generates itself from there. So
yes. And so do you kind of see a blur between genres often? Like, you know, when you're writing a poem, you don't think of it as a poem.
It'll transition. I mean, something will transition out. I might start writing a poem that becomes boring as a poem, but then I think the idea is interesting and I proceed. And then there are certain other things where I wouldn't call them poems, but people do. So it's like, okay, I guess if that's what you think a poem is, you know, it's fine with me. It doesn't matter. My book, Bright Felon, for example, I thought of it as a memoir, as an autobiography, but it was written in this sort of radically impacted prose, and it was written in one sentence paragraphs, and it was written in nonlinear. So it just sort of skipped around, and people felt comfortable calling it a poem and reading it that way. So I thought like, okay, I tried to publish it as a memoir for about a year, and it was like, nobody wanted it. And then I sent it to Wesleyan University Press and I said, you can publish this, but you have to know it's a memoir. It's not a book of poetry. And they said, sure, but we're going to publish it in the Wesleyan Poetry Series. So as long as you don't care about that part, you know, I said, you know, whatever, just do what you have to do.
So if it's not straightforward prose, we'll just call it a poem and we'll just
yeah. It's okay. I love language, so it doesn't matter to me in the end how people read it, but you know, or how I wrote it. Who cares?
Right.
Because writing is writing, you know. I feel like this is more friendly in European spaces or French literary spaces, frankly, where you can write a book and like not be obsessed over its genre so much. But American publishers and reviewers and readers want to know what something is, quote unquote, is. So you tell them. Yeah.
And Matthew, I mean, do you kind of come from the same philosophy of writing, thinking about labels getting in the way, or do you kind of play with the idea of poetry? Where did you start as a poet?
I think, well, I mean, I have to say, I think Cosm's right. Like the labels of literature, like the different genres and stuff. I think as negative a history as labels have, they also make human beings feel really secure and cozy. And it's also the professionalization of writing and writers in the United States, and, you know, writing programs and stuff. I mean, I've never seen people lose their minds over something so unimportant as like prose poems, you know, like, Buck, how is it a poem? But isn't it a paragraph? But how is that different? Why can't I just write a paragraph and call it a poem? You know, I mean, I come from a background, later a background of like collaboration with conceptual artists and stuff, where I feel like if someone was like, hey, this is my poem, I mean, I would be one of those assholes who'd be like, solid, cool poem. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really care. And I feel maybe similar to Cosm in that, you know, language is language, whatever form it's in, it still holds its inner qualities, which is mystery and power and all these things. And yeah, I think people label different things because they need to market different things in a way. I mean, not that poetry's ever marketed in some way that people make money here in the United States anyway, but like, it just makes more sense to them. I mean, I too write things that start as poems and then make their way into like personal essays and stuff like that. There's no, I don't know. I don't really see the importance of distinguishing sometimes.
Right. That makes sense. And I was thinking about your latest collection. We'll talk about Cosmos in just a second, but like Matthew wrote your latest called Wonderland, and which often focuses on, well, I guess your beginnings in a lot of ways, your childhood in Portland. And you speak to a Portland that's maybe very different than the Portland that we know outside of that world. We often think of Portland as kind of like a hip place to live, and you're looking at a different side that we maybe don't get to see. Can you kind of talk about like your latest work and what went into this collection? And Cosmo was often talking about how music influenced his work, and you have a lot of punk rock going on in this, literally as titles in this piece. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your latest work.
Yeah, well, it is deeply about Portland, about growing up in Portland at a certain time. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, Portland, I mean, most of Portland wasn't like Portlandia, you know, and Portland had really big issues. I mean, it was a city that was designed through redlining, so there was an automatic sort of racial disparity in the city. It also was a city that did not have a lot going for it as far as like jobs or like new markets or anything like that. Heroin was big in Portland, as it was in most of the Pacific Northwest. So, I mean, that's the kind of Portland that you're starting from. And then, but at the same time, speaking of music, there was a lot of super exciting things happening musically in Portland at the time. My particular little world of my neighborhood, which was a world unto its own. I mean, I remember not until high school, I swear to God, not until high school did I find out that people, I mean, I could see this Mount Hood in the distance. It was a clear day. I knew there was a fucking mountain, you know what I mean? But like, I had no idea that people went and skied on it, like that you could go up and visit it. And so in a way, I didn't know I could leave my own neighborhood at all. And in my neighborhood, I mean, some of the things that I talk about or try to talk about in Wonderland are some of the things that I grew up with, which, you know, I grew up with a kind of, I mean, I've seen on Twitter where people like talk about like male toxicity. And I think, man, your bar is super low. I mean, like the male toxicity that I grew up with in my neighborhood was crazy and open and passed down. It was a kind of male violence and a kind of killing of the male emotional life was like a contract signed between fathers to sons, from fathers to sons. And along with that, you know, racial issues were prevalent in my childhood, in my neighborhood, not through like diversity or anything like that, but through open, active, violent gang campaigns against people of color, against people of different religions than like right-wing, you know, Christians, because a lot of friends of mine's older siblings were part of neo-Nazi skinhead gangs in Portland, which, by the way, weren't considered gangs in the late, you know, 70s to 80s, not until I think early 90s or mid 90s were they considered a gang. You know, so some of those things come up in the book, you know,
Gotcha.
as they would.
Very well. We can't wait to hear more from that when you read for just in a moment. But I want to talk to Cosmo about your latest collection. You had a few out recently, but I'm thinking about the voice of Sheila Chandra, and you were speaking to music earlier, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about Sheila Chandra, just in case people in the audience aren't familiar with her work, and maybe how you're approaching her as an artist in your own poems.
Sheila Chandra is a British Indian singer who started out kind of singing Indian fusion pop, you would call it. She had a bunch of hit records with a band called Monsoon, including, I think the most famous one was called Ever So Lonely. You can look it up. Lots of people know that song. But she soon started to get into a little bit more of an experimental approach to music, which included improvisation as part of her performance practice. She would also perform a certain kind of vocalization common in Indian classical music called konakol, which is a style in which the singer, it's from a rehearsal practice in Indian classical music where the singer tells the drummer what rhythm she wants him to play. So she vocalizes the sound of drums in a certain way. And it developed into, now people perform it. If you go to an Indian classical music concert, it's not ever performed as a main piece, but oftentimes in between the sets, when the players are tuning or warming up or tightening the drum or how is switching the instruments, they will, sometimes the instrumentalists will do this back and forth as like a game sort of. But she started to record these pieces, as well as she started to explore the drone as a compositional location where she would layer sounds of her voice and also with electronica and electronic composition. So she had a path-breaking album in 2001 called "This Sentence is True, the Previous Sentence is False." And it was an EP back in the day when those terms meant anything. It was an EP of 6 tracks of just dynamic music that combines electronic and voice and classical instruments. It was a similarly path-breaking album to Alice Coltrane's 1971 album Universal Consciousness, which melded free jazz and Indian classical music. And so I was super inspired. I've always been inspired by Sheila Chandra in general, but in particular that album. And I came to know in 2008, Sheila Chandra developed a neurological condition known as burnt mouth syndrome, in which one can no longer sing, and one's afflicted with neurological pain in the mechanisms of sound in the throat and mouth. So she can speak with ration. So she'll speak as if, imagine if your voice is very damaged and you're drinking a lot of tea and you're whispering to your loved ones, and maybe you talk a little bit each day, but you're taking care of your voice. That's her life now, 100% of the time. She cannot sing anymore. She cannot do the warm-ups, or she can speak, but she will only speak for like maybe 20 minutes, half an hour a day. And I was very, very inspired is the wrong word, afflicted maybe, seized by this notion that this singer who is redefining sound and who did redefine sound for me in a way, could no longer sing, had become mute. And so I wrestle with that in so many different ways in the book, various different ways that the individual human is, affected or afflicted by forces grander than they are. In her case, the body. In other cases in the book, we're talking about politics and history and what history's done to us.
Right. Would you maybe want to read to us, Kazim, from Sheila Chandra, or you can read
Voice of Sheila Chandra? Sure, I will. Sure, I will. So the central poem, it's 3 long poems. And the last poem, Phosphorus, is a poem that I do not often read, but I wanted to mention it because it's the poem that I wrote when I was in Berlin, when Matthew and I were in Berlin together. I worked on that poem. But I'm not going to read it today either. I just wanted to say it by name. So the title poem, The Voice of Sheila Chandra, is made up of 40 sonnets. And so it's either one long poem or it's a sequence of sonnets. Maybe it's both. So I'll just read a couple of read to you for a few minutes. The Voice of Sheila Chandra. Breaks is constant, was like the river, light on the river, riven that remained a rift, an old rill that sounded. She merged with the vibe, ration of the drum, a hum, a home, womb, and she, moaned in the loam, dark earth, come, Sheila, dame, ocean, dome this poem, roam to tome, tomb, foam, original fountain that fed my mom, Zamzam, when I was born. Long before she lost it, drifts unanchored, wanted to merge, and the body of the singer become the body of the instrument. Talk to the drum, find it, hum, study its vowels. She made her vow to sound slowly, syllable by syllable. She pronounced words in Uzbek, word unmoored, word pure sound. O river, long had I been, long seasons invaded by your current, devoured your tongue of water. Those years time bent, my one voice spoke. Carried cacophony, world, wheel into the human, one small voice, box, pool, slum, midnight. We went into the sea, expecting our prayers might carry themselves across the silver slammed surface, would be answered, or do they answer? Pale cut of prayers do not answer, like back into the dark water. What are those stripes of light across the room? A shape that evaporates upon waking. What language cannot hold onto, what you cannot hold onto. How to transcribe what flickers, what is not fixed, that voice letters not made of ink, but light, not words of fire on stone. How do you transcribe the blank vowel, all the after that aerates, not disappear, but settle down through air you do not want to say, but sing where might be rain, be sky, come down by snow, but no, you invite it to cover you, the blanket, your coat, a heavy pressure, God, pressure of rain. You want to start the song over, but do not dare to be ready. No tune, no cadence, nothing to pick up, no bridge to cross, now to be small again, break through. There is no beginning to any song, only the place the singer picks up the tune. What represses, unhomes in the sound, what has made me, who is made me, is a voice, just muscles and shape and breath to phrase a song. Boats assemble at the mouth of the harbor, mouth in earth. You who wrote an ode to silence never wrote of what is silenced. I did seek all resounding caves, let the voice be lit. All the lanterns in the new world, we need the language of stone from string to string, quiver in the opening of the garden. So beautiful, Lucifer, dark sun of morning, no Eden, but innocence, no expulsion, but after. No more will I listen To other than a single note moaned, not known. I do not hear, think again what place presents here a body, a battery of the one moment to open your mouth, to plug in. I will allow what I invented to find its color, make a shape which neither water nor sky do. How do you now in this contained shape go through your life? Not like a constellation, not guessed at, intuited, or divined. No name, so how do you discern a shape for what is often called God? Music spent my breath to achieve or invent. Death, each chord or cadence out of reach, out of tune. Last time in this town, I promised vow or vowel to turn my back forever on chaos and give myself instead to music, organizing itself in my ear. From chaos, a river made rather than music that makes a shape of endless seconds. I devoted myself to the equation of numbers. Between each sound, a formula that matches planets and atoms. Music is not an art, but science. I could have remained alive, but I broke. And I will close with 3 little poems left. In a world governed by storm and noise, why then should a singer not fall silent, though by great suffering, her mouth, that orchestra hall of flame, the drone, her most minuscule movement, still do the echoes resound. Even now can I discern them. Anish Kapoor explores the place, sight disappears, rich dark that opens, he makes shapes of them, invites you to understand or learn where the effort to understand fails. Agnes Martin, her shapes of white absence, both what, when the throat fails, sounds out, does Sheila still listen to music? What does it sound like? Well, I will actually read an extra poem. I have a little bit more time, so I'll read one more. I'll read one more sonnet, and then I will close with the last 2 sonnets in the sequence. Calligraphy is a meeting point between abstract and the particular, by certain combinations of visual marks to make symbols. Chandra lost her voice around the same time I found mine. At midnight, we went to swim in the sea, not know the bottom, but the moon lit up the surface, so silver, so slammed, and then the boy inside with the fear of failure, falling, architecture, voice, God, depths, death. He swam. And then these are the final 2 poems in the sequence. Oh, in the house of Sheila Chandra, silence do not reign. Sheila Chandra's voice that swells of sun, I am one. What word quells the chords in the box, the mouth, throat, third voice sought, do not rain in rain, my hands, hand me the rain. Will you sing? Can you swing your votes, vox, fox in the hausa? I learned scripture, stripped her in the roost, roused all the birds to the blue, the moon, sun, singer, singes, now the world, sound, some, echo, wind, echo, wing. Who can, born, then believe, beleaguered, besieged, be seen leagues from where you started, parted in league with my liege, legions of sound, sound, sounder, her then believed darkest black and be unseen, a voice tracks back for frown, fawn, fond, founded, fundament, firmly this firmament, this fund of sound, born where you are, I did not want to be found. How can you say that? How can you now know what foe? No, she sang out, flow, she breathed, be real, Eve and lo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We had somebody in the chat actually just recently put in this, and I was thinking something similar. And they said, that's beautiful. I have had the privilege to hear you read it. If I were just sitting and reading this, so much would be lost when it comes through the way you read this. And it's so true that how you translate it vocally is so much different than on the page. But you do try to kind of imitate some of these things on the page. And so before we get to Matthew, I was kind of curious if you could, Cosmo, if you could talk just a bit about this, how you mentioned music playing a role in how you write, and there's a playfulness in the language and sometimes kind of a more of a free, like almost like an association as a, you know, that escapes linear logic, much like music. And I'm just kind of curious if you can talk to us a little bit about how you approach this idea of the musical into language, how you write it on the page or how you write the line. I'm just kind of curious if you could talk more about that.
For me, it is very much breath, the root of music. I mean, first one draws energy up from the root of the body, and then the diaphragm plays the role. These are the 7 chakras in yoga, right? You have first at the root, second at the sacrum, the third in the diaphragm, the fourth in the what's called the heart center, but it's where the lungs are. And the fifth is the throat, and the sixth is the cavern of the skull. So there are these caverns in the body. The body is an orchestra hall. There are various openings and cavities, the belly, the rib cage, the mouth, and the skull has a cavity too, and the brain is in there too. So you have 6 and 7, and there's a resonant space in between those two. So a singer or an actor or a yogi would teach you that breath happens all the way up and down. And you might listen to an actor who's really trained, and like, we often think about them as hammy because they're pulling out their entire voice into their performance. I'm going to give you a very easy example of an actor who does this, so you can go look it up. You can listen to him. But Avery Brooks, who's a very legendary actor, but is probably most famously known for playing the captain in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and the captain's name is Captain Sisko, Sisko. Just go on YouTube and watch a scene with him. Just watch him speaking, and you can hear this. It's like his body is like a not a wind instrument, a string instrument. You know, it's like a cello or a bass, and he just resonates when he speaks. You know.
Right.
And so to me, that's where it starts, before words. But at the top end, when you talk about the text on the page as potentially a score for performance, there are 2 things that this book has in abundance on purpose with strategy, which is actually one thing it has in abundance with strategy and one thing it has nothing of. The one thing that it has is a lot of pun and misspellings and words that stand in for other words. And those are moments of dissonance in the text where one might even think they're errors. And earlier in my writing career, I actually really explored the concept of the mistake, including the typographical mistake, but I was too new as a writer and nobody took that very seriously. And I published a bunch of them, but I didn't put much of those in my books, you know, although the newest project that I've been working on since the quarantine started is I've done a crown of sonnets of 13 sonnets that really, really explore that concept of the mistake and the translingual as well, like including words from other languages, and also digging down into English to find words from the Middle English and from Middle French and from Middle Norse and from Middle Scottish, all of which came into what we now think of as contemporary English. And so I've been allowed to do, or allowed myself, or maybe allowed by others to do things that I wasn't able to do, but that I've always been interested in. The other thing that I've always had an issue with, but never really did as fully as I did in this book, was there is barely any punctuation in this book. I think there's 3 periods in the whole book. In the final poem where they play certain roles, but mostly a punctuation does tell you how, quote unquote, how to read something. It tells you where the pauses are, it tells you where the clauses are, it tells you where the sentence stops. And I dispensed with all of that in these poems. So it's true, I don't see the chat, but whomever mentioned it in the chat around not knowing how to read it and or feeling that it's only going to come through when I recite it, I think that when you take a look at a poem like this on the page, you become the musician, you become the singer. And what we say about a musician playing a piece or a singer singing a piece, we use the verb interpret, like how the singer interprets a song, and they, can do it in some exciting new way. And that too is how a reader might read these poems out loud, interpret. And I want you to know, there's no score marks in my book to tell me how to read them. I do myself improvise with them, and the sound and the rhyme, they come in their own time.
Oh wow!
I made a rhyme.
I noticed that.
As happens.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation, Kazem. Matthew, would you like to read a little bit from your work, Wonderland, or anything else you're working on?
Yeah, I actually sort of planned a Kazem reading. So I'm going to read 4 poems from Wonderland that like we were chatting about before this began, when I was just working on this book as a very early draft, was blessed to be in Berlin with Kazem, meeting up at night and going over poems. And so Kazem's fingerprints, along with a couple other people's, all over this book. And in particular, 4 poems that I recall conversations about. So I thought I would read those. And then I would read a brand new poem that also was affected by Kazem's work in Inquisition. When I was reading this book, again, not too long ago, actually, I wrote a couple new poems that were very affected and influenced by Kazem's longer lined poems in Inquisition. So I'll read 4 poems from Wonderland, and then I'll end with this new poem. Okay. Teenage riot. All of us were boys, only some were taller and already in high school, and almost nothing else mattered but to learn some new trick, to pull off something we saw in a skate video, wind cutting around our bodies when we flew off the lip of a ramp, grabbed the board and twisted it into a 180, kicking a leg out and landing it. The only way to run through the neighborhood was to run through it together, flipping off cops and skinheads. I almost don't even remember girls, but a vague sense of the taste of bubble gum and how they smelled so different from us, sitting in some kid's basement, drinking his parents' vodka. We grew out our bangs, moved in packs, jumped in when some one of us got jumped. So when a man we'd never seen before came up and started beating on Simon, one of us dropped his skateboard, walked over to the man like someone walking into a bank, and stabbed him. The man, startled, sat down right there on the asphalt, right in the middle of his new consciousness, kind of looking around. dirty, rotten imbeciles. The crows are crazy. It's like they are the only things that love each other here. In the air, moving away from each other, clouds of death smoke empires, then coming back, lighting and alighting and lightning. It's good to return, black lightning and soft. They see everything and let it happen. They let the men happen to the women, and the women happen to the children. They let the lilac trees blossom in the rain, the maples drop their leaves. They let the Rottweilers sleep in the grassless backyards. They let the cats get run over and the moon rise. St. Francis and the Pine Tree. Before they beat me, I knelt down beneath the pine tree and lowered my head and placed my hands in front of me like two plates together, but lightly so they wouldn't break. Just like this. Like how a child psychologist would do with two dolls, one female and one male, and ask, was it like this? My hands barely touching, so that you could draw a piece of floss between them, and inside the 10-year-old cave I had made of myself, I thought of St. Francis and how he forgave everyone and was poor like me, though he could have been rich, and how he was always standing beneath a tree or standing with an animal that lived in trees, and how he was kept alive by love. And that was what I was going to do. I knelt there and smelled the pine and said aloud some made up prayer about forgiveness. And that's when the front of a skateboard slammed into my face, into it, but also sort of through my face, like a breeze made out of wood and metal. I looked up into the arms and stiff green needles of the pine tree, and it seemed like a father looking down on me the way fathers do, though the arms moved like a mother. And I wasn't alone. I had the boys who were beating me for one and the pine for the other. After that, I felt like every tree knew who I was, that I loved love, though I had no real idea about it or what to do. I mean, really, what to do. And then one of the boys held my arms, while another boy held my legs, while another boy pulled down my pants, while another boy grabbed a branch, grabbed a part of the pine tree that had fallen, and waved it in front of my face and said, we're going to stick it in you. We're going to stick it up your ass. But was a coward, or he was also afraid, so just hit me with it and laughed. And then some wind came because it doesn't care about shame or kids, and rose up beneath the pine, and with it, some of the boys' beautiful brown hair. And the pine tree moved, and the boys looked off at something else, and then followed after it, whatever unlucky thing it was. And I sat there alone again, but for the pine and the light in the tree and the wind. And I thought of St. Francis and how he might stand up now and hug the tree and call him brother, for had not the tree stood there and witnessed him, his body? And so I stood up in my rugged robe of blue jeans and t-shirt and hugged the tree and kissed it and thanked it for not leaving me and called it brother, and then never came near it again. For the following summer, I felt God walk away and chose my cock over sainthood and stood beneath the weeping willow and kissed Angela Marquez and took her tongue into my mouth, and she took my fingers into her body, and the willow moved above and all around us. It held us and kept us until we were done with one another, and then it let us go. And then this last one from Wonderland. Black lipstick. My little sister is sneaking her friends out of the back door of a bar because the men in there won't stop touching them. And the people in the bar won't stop the men. And the men keep ordering sweet drinks they think the women will like, but they don't want them. All they want to do is leave and live. When I get out of the shower and look in the mirror, I say to myself, you should go to the gym. You should lose weight. Be more handsome. People who rape other people have bodies like mine. People who hate their wives and daughters. They hate them and go to the bar and drink too much and touch people who do not want to be touched. I don't know. I miss being young and going out in eyeliner and skirts. I miss wearing black lipstick. Fucking boys and girls was the best. It felt like drinking iced Americanos on the roof of the world. From there, you were safe. You could smoke clove cigarettes with your friends. You could throw rocks at the men down below, walking down the street with their brains in one hand and their hearts in another, a parade of terrible potential, while their mothers stand along the sidewalk clapping and cheering, waving baby blue handkerchiefs in the cold air. So those are 4 poems from Wonderland. And then I'll read this new poem, inspired by Night of Reading Cosm. And it's called Who on Earth? Who on earth? The sound of a basketball somewhere inside the dark tonight, somewhere in the very inside of the rain. It sounds like a bird banging itself back and forth between the walls of a chimney. In the chimney, it is always Christmas night. In Me Too, a holiday dark, and maybe some snow, some gust of wind, some nightshirts, some holly, some red inedible berries, and a bird poking at them with his beak. I woke up this morning in Oregon again just to say, I love you, though you have no parents on earth, though you must by now have no body. Inside the basketball, just the sound of air, and we can't hear that. Compressed air making the skin of the basketball taut, and we can't hear that. My friend in high school playing the comic relief to his suicide in a mixtape he left behind. My older brother playing the straight man to the ceiling fan that whirred above his body when all the parts of his body stopped working. Just womp, womp, womp. Just womp, 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 womp. Who loved him on earth more than the socks he had taken off and folded neatly by the door? Who loved him on earth more than his sister, more than his brothers, more than his daughter loved him on earth? Who on earth? At Joseph's funeral, his parents cried and talked about how Joseph had recently returned to Christ just months before the car accident. I guess for her, that would have been squarely in the middle of just in time. Christmas night. All his friends in the pews smiled, but inside us, womp, 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 a bird breaking its neck in a chimney. I'm having a whale of a time tonight, trying to remember just who was at the funeral. My applesauce brain, my tea and cake body. Across the street, the basketball bounces, and in bed, my little son is asleep and crying at the same time, the same beat, bouncing some grief off his rib cage. All these sad boys, I want to wake them all up, shake the dust off of their bones, kiss the sleep out of their eyes, smooth the sticky hair away from their foreheads, hold them and walk them through the house and pat them soft on their back between their shoulder blades, singing, there, 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 there. Oh, how are we ever loved on earth? Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Yeah.
That was great. I'm going to kind of like build on what we were talking about with Cosm and thinking about the music of the line that you were looking at. And you do use punctuation, but you also have these very long lines and they kind of wind and weave, and music is obviously a huge influence on how I feel like how you write as well. Can you talk a little bit about music and how it influences you, or how you approach the sound of the poem?
Yeah, I think I can. I can try.
It's a big question, I know.
I mean,
but-
yeah, I mean, I listen to music all the time and all kinds of music. I mean, there's definitely songs or feelings that I get from certain songs that I not so much think, oh man, I want to try to replicate that sound in a poem, but I want to get the same feeling out of a poem, which is impossible, kind of, you know. Like, I don't know, like I remember the first time I heard Pop Smoke's song, Welcome to the Party. You know, that's, I mean, it's an incredible song, and it's an incredible feeling you have listening to it. And I would listen to that poem or that song, and then I would have that feeling in my body later when I wrote a poem, though you never see a connection, you know, which is true to anything I listen to, whether it's like Minor Threat or the Talking Heads or, you know, Depeche Mode or Pop Smoke or whoever. So this is all a way of me to talk for a while and not answer your question at all, except just to say that like, is like music affects maybe my line in a sort of sloppy, intuitive way.
Right. Well, I would also ask that how has your like maybe work changed? I feel like the work in Wonderland is maybe a little bit different than the work that you started off with about 15 years ago with your first collection, and I'm kind of curious about how you've changed your approach, or how a poem concludes even, or anything like that.
I mean, so much has changed, you know. I mean, All American Poem, would not like write that book today. I mean, back then, years and years and years ago, I had found a sort of narrative poem that was sort of free associative narrative in a way. It would start somewhere and wind around, and it would come back. And it often had, accidentally or on purpose, it had some humor and different things in it. And I found that mentors of mine, and then when I would do a reading on audience members, like that. And so that's just what I wanted to do, because I want to be liked by other people. And reasonable. I was kind of like doing that. And then I came to this point around the time I was kind of working on Mayakovsky's Revolver, which centers on my older brother's suicide, among other friends' suicides. And I remember having this moment where I thought, I've changed in my life. I mean, unless something's really wrong, you can't help but change during your life. And I thought, how am I changed during my life, but the way I express it, the poem hasn't? Like, how can I go back and even write a sort of poem in that same way and have it be an artistic experience that's worthwhile at all, you know? And so that really helped me change the way I approached poems and the way I approached the figure of the self or my own speakerhood in the poem, like in Wonderland. Like, I don't think I'm such a fucking hero in All American Poem. You know, the I in All American Poem. It's just like a hero over and over and over again, you know, telling you this stuff and like giving you this like whatever insight. And in Wonderland, I don't think it's like that at all. I don't think the speaker is a hero in Wonderland. And
there's a lot of shame, actually.
Yeah.
Which is new. Yeah. That was not present in either of your previous.
Yeah, it would have been too it would have been too vulnerable at the time those other books were written for me to even tap into. Yeah. You know, in a way. So it's become, I guess with each book, I've tried to become more and more naked in a way, not in a self-grandizement way, but in a just a more human way. So like my next book, Husbandry, which will come out this time next year, I think is even more naked than Wonderland.
Thank you for sharing that. And actually, this goes along with some of the Q&A. Well, we have several questions actually for Kazım, and I'll try to condense them down so that and these will be kind of big, but it's more focusing on translation, I guess. And one of our audience members says, I'm really interested in translation. I want to get my MFA in translation or literary translation. And I have so many questions, but the main question is, how do you preserve the original language's impact and style when the target language feels so inherently different? And then there's another audience member with kind of a follow-up thinking about the transition of language. I was born in India and raised in America, and I feel I have no proper grasp of any of the languages I speak. And she's kind of asking, how do you freely translate between these two languages and stay authentic? So I guess
no one has a proper grasp of the language that they speak or that we are supposed to speak. And that notion that there is a standard English, it's just like an agreed upon, corporate English that the political and socially constructed idea of correctness. But if you travel around this country, if you talk to actual people, and if you listen to what their voices sound like, we all speak with different accents. We all speak with different speech patterns. Forget about them varying region to region. They vary in family to family. People have different expressions and different words, and they're embedded in their own histories. That's a microcosm of how the larger language actually works. And all the politics around language, they're 100% related to politics around nationhood and to questions of power and legitimacy. So I don't think you should feel any concern about that, first of all. In fact, you ought to embrace in a certain way that you have languages from various different streams and various different modalities and ways of meaning. If you speak, you said you were from India. You didn't say if you spoke Hindi or Urdu or what, but those languages have a different way of making meaning. There's a different sentence order. So there's automatically a different emphasis. There's different ways of vocalizing emotion. As in Chinese and as in Spanish, as in French, like every language has, they're not just words in a dictionary, but there's an energy of breath that flows through a sentence that makes it different as well. And there's a quality of emotion in every language. I mean, the joke about like French is the language of love, or like, the joke about like, oh, it's Italian is so romantic to listen to, there's something about the delivery that is like, has quality. So when one is translating, honestly, so the second half of the question is, you have to embrace that. And that difference, those differences, those uniquenesses, the things that make your own relationship to English and or mother tongue, whatever it is, unique, is what gives you power. That's where your poetry comes from, actually, is your own unique relationship to language, whatever it is. I happen to not have a mother tongue. Many of us who are, immigrant or grew up in immigrant families, we don't have single mother tongues. There may be many different languages that we heard, and my first language was not English. The language that was my first language, I don't know anymore. It's gone. So, that's something else. So in translating, I think, to answer the second question, a translator is really looking at what is the energy of the language, what are the qualities of the language. And that's why people say, I forget who said it, someone specifically said it, Friedrich Schleiermacher, I think, said it, but, or Caspar Friedrich, but they say that the translation changes the original. That's a normal thing to say, but what's more radical is the notion that the translation, the act of translating a text into English can change English. So the argument was made about German. They said when Hölderlin translated the ancient Greek fragments into German, it changed German. His translation was so radical, it changed German. So we now say, like, maybe Maria Dahvana Hadley's Beowulf is going to change English. Certainly when Paul Celan started to be translated widely in the United States, it changed American poetry. There was like a revolution in American poetry when people encountered Celan translated properly into English. One could say when the original Dickinsons when Dickinson's actual writing was revealed with the 1955 edition, that too changed American poetry because it was like coming from another language. Dickinson did not speak English the way she didn't write in English the way we think of English as. So I think that translation is a whole body act. It is, as Walter Benjamin says, it is itself an act of creation. You are writing the poem anew in the new language, and you have to bring all of those resources to bear. If you want an example of what I mean, go find Christian Wyman's translations of Osip Mandelstam and then compare them to any other translation that exists. And you'll see what it means when a translator really approaches the sound of the original, the weirdness of the original, the rhythm of the original. And the irony of ironies, of all ironies, is that Christian Wyman does not read Russian. He worked off of trots that were created for him by Ilya Kaminsky, and then Ilya would recite the Russian and send Christian tapes, and Christian worked from that to fashion these translations in English. But many Slavic scholars, including Stephanie Sandler, who's the chair of Slavic studies at Harvard, says that Christian's Mandelstam is the best and most faithful to the original Russian Mandelstam, because Christian was a poet doing it.
Oh. This is actually a great transition to another question we have in the Q&A for Matthew, actually, and it's saying about Russian poetry. So he says, I read a lot of Russian poetry.
Perfect.
So I am really curious about the references to Russian poets in your poetry, Matthew. Could you speak a little bit about why Mayakovsky and hope I'm not slaughtering this word, but Amatova, is that how you pronounce it?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly.
Close enough.
Okay.
You just did it from your body. Those are not like necessarily the cultural influences. I mean, Mayakovsky came up because I love the translations of Mayakovsky's poems I had seen. I mean, my sort of access to Russian poetry that I was reading, I think was maybe, it was very a formal kind of poetry, and with like kind of formal concerns. And Mayakovsky is crazy. I mean, Bedbug is a nuts poem. And so I was a fan of Mayakovsky. And then the only influence is that after my older brother committed suicide, I kept having these dreams about my older brother, and one of them quite literally included Mayakovsky. And there's some question whether Mayakovsky actually committed suicide or was killed by a KGB operative. But Mayakovsky kind of came in as a surrogate brother in dreams. And so that's why Mayakovsky shows up so prevalently in that book. I want to read these Christian Wyman translations because it does make me think of Berg's versions of Akhmatova's poems. Stephen Berg called them versions because, again, I don't think Berg, I think Berg was self-conscious of not knowing the original language of the poems, etc. But they were, again, they were just like so wild, and Akhmatova came up, as this, was a suffering mother among many other things, and whose son was imprisoned and I believe died in prison. And that poem, or that book of mine, Mayakovsky's Revolver, I mean, is in part about suffering due to other family members' types of imprisonment.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that response. I know we're a little bit over, but maybe we'll just end on one question. And if you can give just one piece of advice to a beginning writer, or maybe one bit of advice that you give to your former self as you were beginning writing, what would that be? What's kind of like one idea that you would like to impart to our students?
First of all, I apologize for my cat. He's feeling very needy this morning, so he's insisting that I told him. He's a little attention hog. I'm gonna suggest a piece of advice that I would love to have given to myself. I don't necessarily know if this is right for your students, and I don't want to suggest that it's right for everybody or anybody. I think it's very different, but from the very beginning, I wanted to get my work out there. I think that's probably not unusual. You know, there's a difference between a poet who maybe just writes and writes and writes, and one who's really wanting to publish their work and make sure that people know about it and publish a book and, you know, get out there into the world as much as possible. And that's the kind of poet I was, and that's the poet that I've been since then. And I wish I could tell my younger self, like, you can wait, you can just write poems, they can be your secret. You can keep the secret for as long as you want, you know, it's not important. I don't know what I've lost from being so public with myself. I don't know.
Oh,
I have regrets.
Well, I think that's great advice, because many people are so ambitious to get their work out there that they kind of forget about why they want to get their stuff out there. No, that's great advice. Matthew, do you have a piece of advice?
I don't know if I have a piece of advice either. I guess, I mean, one would be to be like kind to yourself and to write a bunch of different things, you know, within that kindness. I don't have advice as much as I have like a wish, which was like, I feel I was very lucky. Like when I was just starting to write poems, I found like 2 or 3 other people who were also weirdos, who were in love with poetry, who wanted to write poems. And I've had that relationship with them now for, you know, over 20 years. And so to find a couple people that you can actually sit with physically, you know, and nerd out about poems and dream up your life in poems with, that's what I would wish for people. It's not always available to people, but that's what I would wish. Yeah. That's what I would wish for them.
Finding that community. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, for spending the hour with us and sharing your words and your words of wisdom. And I really appreciate it. And I know we haven't even touched upon all the questions that are out there. So I know that everybody's been like taking in your words. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us. It was really fun.
Awesome.
Super fun. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Okay. I'll let you guys go then. Bye.
Bye. Love to all.
Bye. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.